David first set foot in the mountain village on a hazy afternoon in early spring. Pale clouds had been hugging the ridges all morning, and it was only around midday that the sun finally pierced through, revealing steep footpaths that zigzagged between clusters of stone cottages. He and Elena arrived by a rattling bus that seemed older than them combined, carrying their bulky gear and an eagerness to learn. Although both were seasoned travelers, this trip felt different. The rumors of ancient customs and a distinctive annual festival were what originally drew them, but there was something deeper that neither quite knew how to name. They walked from the bus stop, drawn by the scent of wild herbs, as an older man waved them over and guided them through narrow alleys toward the main square. When they reached the central plaza, Elena ran her hand along the cracked wooden shutters of the shops. She was a photographer by profession, her keen eyes already sizing up every bit of scenery for perfect angles. David, an anthropologist, was here on a research mission sanctioned by a small university department back in the United States. He was tasked with documenting the cultural traditions of this region and understanding how the local community preserved, and sometimes transformed, older rituals in the modern era. His mind was brimming with questions, but he also felt the anticipation of immersing himself in a society that guarded its secrets closely. Over the next week, they rented a small cottage near the village center. The place was modest, its rooms warmed by an old iron stove that rattled when the fire was at its highest. Outside, a narrow veranda overlooked a field of olive trees. The elders had already heard of David's arrival. Word traveled fast in a place of just a few hundred residents, and a respected local matriarch named Maria had greeted him warmly on the first day, offering homemade bread and jam, telling him they would speak more at length once he settled in. Elena and David spent most of that first week making acquaintances, strolling through the dusty lanes, and sipping thick coffee in the shade of ancient oak trees. Though outsiders were occasionally welcomed, there was a degree of caution in how the locals revealed details of their biggest festival. David, with his notebook always tucked under his arm, took note of the guarded manner that surfaced whenever he asked about the event. He sensed there was something deeper in their hush. One evening, David and Elena were invited to Maria's home for supper. She lived in a centuries-old house with a curved wooden door that squeaked when it opened. Inside, the walls were stone, and the aroma of simmering stew permeated the dimly lit main room. David noticed that Maria's floors were covered with thick woven rugs in patterns he recognized from older texts describing the region's customs. Every detail seemed a tapestry of tradition: the carved wooden chairs, the embroidered cloth on the table, the meticulous arrangement of family portraits, generations captured in black and white. As Maria set bowls of steaming stew on the table, David reached for his small tape recorder and asked if it would be acceptable to record their conversation. With a gentle nod, she agreed. Over dinner, he learned that the village's annual festival was only a month away. It involved music, dancing, feasting, and a ceremonial procession that honored what Maria described as ancient guardians of the fields. According to local lore, these figures, though dressed in female attire, were said to be embodiments of spirits that brought fertility to the land and protected the harvest. David leaned in with interest. "And the men who dress this way, have they all done it for generations?" he asked softly. Maria paused, letting the question linger. "Yes," she replied, "but not all men. Usually a few are chosen each year, guided by certain elders. They wear special outfits that have been in families for generations. Masks are often worn too, so these figures appear both familiar and otherworldly. It is a way of blending reality and myth in our celebration." Elena's camera rested on her lap as she listened. She observed how Maria's voice carried pride. So the entire village joins the celebration. Indeed, Maria answered. The festival breathes life into our community. It's a heritage that ties us to our ancestors. But it's more than a simple performance. Those who don these costumes embody something that transcends everyday life. The parade is meant to unify everyone, to remind us of our shared bonds. After they finished dinner, the conversation wound down. Maria walked them back to the door, stopping just before the threshold. In a cautious tone, she said to David, "If you want to truly know us, you may have to wear the garments yourself. Observing from the sidelines will never reveal the core of this tradition. Consider it carefully." David felt a little jolt of surprise. He smiled, unsure how to respond. "I'll think about it, thank you," he said. Elena slipped her arm through his as they stepped out into the brisk night, the sky bright with stars. Neither said much on the walk home, though David could sense his own pulse quickening. Over the next few days, David interviewed local farmers, listened to tales from fishermen who lived near the river, and immersed himself in the rhythms of village life as best he could. Though he asked questions about the festival at almost every opportunity, many only gave general answers. "It's about renewal," or "it brings good fortune." The festival was still weeks away, but daily preparations were already underway. Splashes of color began appearing in windows and doorways. Banners were draped across the plaza, and David often caught fleeting glimpses of women hunched over large wooden chests, pulling out ornate dresses and carefully folded fabrics that must have been stored since the previous year. One afternoon, while Elena ventured off to photograph the winding trails on the outskirts, David found himself in the village cafe. It was a small stone building with a simple sign above the door. Inside, sunbeams streamed through narrow windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the worn wooden tables. An older gentleman, whom David recognized as one of the local elders, invited him to sit. The man had gray hair and a stern, dignified look about him. He introduced himself as Petro. "I have heard you've been talking to many about our festival," Petro said. "People say you are curious." David nodded. "I want to document and understand. My hope is to write about these traditions with respect." Petro's gaze turned thoughtful. "We appreciate that. Our ceremony, especially the part where men dress in old-style female clothing, is something that has been challenged by outsiders in the past. People have come, taken pictures, and then twisted the meaning in publications. It led to misunderstandings." David leaned forward. "I intend to show care in the way I represent it. My aim is to learn directly from the community, not to sensationalize anything." "Yes," said Petro, "we can see that. And some of us think it might be time for you to participate. Maria spoke with me. She said you appear to have a genuine respect for our ways. Would you be open to playing the role of one of these mythical guardians?" He paused, noticing David's eyes widen. "Before you answer, understand that those who do so must commit fully. It won't be enough for you to wear half the regalia. You must represent the figure as authentically as we do." David cleared his throat. "I don't want to offend anyone," he said, "but if it helps me connect, to truly see your perspective from inside, I'm open to the idea. Please let me know what's required." Petro clasped his hands on the table. "The next few weeks, you'll be trained by some of the local women. They'll teach you the steps to the dance, the significance of each garment, and how to conduct yourself during the procession. It is a sacred duty. If you accept it, we ask that you honor it fully." Despite a slight flutter of nerves in his stomach, David nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. "I accept." That evening, Elena returned from her photo excursion to find David pacing in front of the cottage. She set her camera bag down and raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've got something on your mind," she said. He laughed a bit sheepishly. I might have agreed to wear the festival attire, the one traditionally reserved for male villagers who represent those guardian spirits. Elena's eyes lit up. She'd been fascinated by the festival from the start, seeing it as a photographer's dream. Really? How do you feel about that? Nervous, David replied, rubbing the back of his neck, but also intrigued. Petro and Maria say this is the best way to understand the festival from the inside. I want to respect their trust. They're opening their tradition to me, so I want to give it the sincerity it deserves. She nodded. Let's do it then. I'll be there every step, taking pictures, helping however I can. Just promise you won't laugh when you see me in full regalia, David teased, though a flicker of anxiety crossed his face. Elena smirked. I might laugh a little, but I'll also help make sure you look dignified. Their conversations stretched into the night, each of them speculating about the costumes, about how the villagers might react to an outsider adopting one of their roles, and about the deeper meaning behind the tradition. By the time they turned in, David's head spun with questions, but he also felt a sense of anticipation. 2 days later, David's lessons began. A group of local women, led by Maria and her daughter Sophia, gathered in a large, airy room at the far edge of the village. It was usually used for storing and mending festival outfits. Large trunks lined the walls, each filled with dresses, shawls, sashes, and masks. Some pieces looked like they hadn't seen daylight in decades. Patterns were embroidered in gold, silver, and bright reds, blues, and greens. The fabrics were heavier than David expected, some thickly woven, others layered with multiple skirts. Sophia, a woman in her late 20s with a warm smile, invited David to stand in the center while they measured him. Elena documented the process, quietly snapping photographs as Sophia wrapped a cloth tape measure around David's shoulders, waist, hips, and thighs. Maria hovered nearby, exchanging hushed words in the local dialect with 2 other women, discussing which outfit would suit his frame. David held his arms out, feeling a bit vulnerable, yet also oddly excited. When they brought out a possible ensemble, David's eyes widened. The top had elaborate stitching along the edges, floral patterns reminiscent of old woodcut designs, and the skirt was multiple layers of pleated fabric that swished loudly even when brushed lightly by a hand. A wide sash of deep crimson was meant to be tied around the waist, and the headpiece, made of braided fabric interwoven with ribbons, rose several inches high. The entire outfit weighed more than David anticipated. He tried it on piece by piece, with Sophia and Elena helping position the skirts correctly, while Maria looked on, occasionally giving instructions for adjustments. The final item was a mask carved from thin wood, painted white with delicate red and black designs around the eyes. It was shaped to resemble a serene female face, and when he placed it against his skin, he felt a rush of energy course through him. In the mirror's reflection, he saw not just himself in a costume, but something that looked antique, like it belonged to a painting or a dream. Sophia stepped forward, tapping the mask lightly. "During the procession," she said, "we say you stop being yourself. You embody the spirit. The same is true for the local men who wear it every year. While behind that mask, you represent the guardian, the one who blesses the fields and wards off misfortune." David swallowed, nodding. He felt an electric tension at the prospect. Over the following days, training sessions became a routine. Each morning, David would head to that same hall where Sophia taught him the movements of the ceremonial dance. It involved precise footwork, slow turns, and at times, symbolic gestures with the arms raised, almost as if embracing the sky. The music was provided by fiddles, drums, and a flute-like instrument that produced a haunting, high-pitched melody. David practiced for hours, occasionally stumbling over the billowing skirts, his ankles tangling in the heavy fabric. The women laughed good-naturedly, their encouragement softening any embarrassment. Elena quietly captured photos, sometimes stepping in to fix the folds of the skirt or to straighten the headpiece. One afternoon, after a particularly long practice, David slumped on a chair, fanning himself with a piece of paper. "I never imagined how exhausting this could be," he said, panting. "I have a whole new respect for those who do this every year." Maria, sipping tea, chuckled. "That's why we start rehearsals early. It's physically demanding, but it must appear effortless. On the day of the festival, everyone sees only the beauty and splendor of the dance, not the sweat behind it." Elena knelt to snap a photo of David's tired face. "I'll be sure to capture that sweat too," she said teasingly. Word spread around the village that the foreign anthropologist was being prepared by Maria and Sophia to join the procession. Reactions were mixed. Some older folks were hesitant. Outsiders rarely participated in such an intimate role, but others were excited to see a new perspective. David overheard a group of middle-aged men discussing it at the local tavern one evening. A man named Darius, who was known for having played one of the guardian roles many times in his youth, approached David with a friendly pat on the back. "So you're one of us this year," he said with a half-smile. "Don't let the skirts trip you up." He clinked his glass of wine against David's. "Give it your best." That night, as David and Elena walked back home through the quiet streets, she asked him how he felt about their reactions. He shrugged. "I expected some doubt, but at least no one seems outright hostile. The culture here is strong, but they're giving me room, trusting me to handle it properly." Elena nodded. "They value authenticity. That's what we both need to show them." Despite the everyday tasks, Elena sorting her growing portfolio of village images, and David continuing other parts of his research, the festival preparation overshadowed everything. It was the through line of their days. Every night after dinner, David would lie awake, replaying the dance steps in his head, remembering the feel of swirling skirts around his legs. He also found himself drawn to the aesthetic details, the texture of the fabrics, the colors that popped under certain light, even the gentle sway of the headpiece. He had never before paid such attention to clothing, much less garments made for female figures. Yet something about it felt uniquely potent, as though he was accessing a hidden side of life he had never known. One evening, while trying on part of the costume at home to practice balancing the headpiece, he heard Elena's voice from the doorway. "You look amazing," she said, quietly stepping inside. "I'm not just saying that. There's a poise in how you're standing, like you've become more aware of each movement." David looked down at the swirling skirt. "I never realized how clothing could affect how I carry myself," he admitted. "It changes the way I walk, the way I breathe, everything. I know it's connected to the tradition, but I'm finding there's a resonance in the garments themselves." Elena reached out and adjusted the ribbons trailing from the headpiece. "You've also discovered something you didn't expect," she said gently. "This role is more than just a research project, but don't let it overwhelm you. The festival is soon, and you'll do great." He nodded, feeling a combination of excitement and a twinge of nerves about the path he was on. The day of the festival arrived sooner than David realized. It began well before dawn. The entire village was stirring, lights flickering on in windows, and faint drums echoing across the square. The procession would start around midday, but there was a tremendous amount of preparation. David went to the same hall where the outfits were kept. The place was buzzing with activity. Some of the local men in their own elaborate attire, women adjusting hairpieces and ribbons, and children peeking around corners in wide-eyed wonder. Elena found a corner with good lighting and began snapping pictures of the commotion. Sophia guided David to a side room where the pieces of his costume had been laid out neatly. "We'll help you dress," she said softly, ushering 2 other women to assist. David removed his casual clothes and stood in a simple undergarment as layer after layer of the costume was fitted around him. Underskirt, main skirt, embroidered bodice, sashes, and more. Every piece was carefully positioned so that the elaborate designs would align perfectly. Each fold of fabric carried symbolic significance: good harvest, well-being, unity. David felt the weight multiply, as though he carried centuries of cultural memory on his body. Finally, they fastened the braided headpiece into his hair, tightening the ribbons until it sat firmly on his head. As they gently placed the mask over his face, David's field of vision narrowed slightly, and he was forced to rely on his peripheral vision for guidance. The mask's delicate painting transformed him into a silent figure. Elena stepped back, camera in hand. "You look indescribable," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. Maria gave him a few final words of encouragement. "Today, you stand among us in spirit. Trust your practice. Let the music guide you." Outside, in the main square, the festival atmosphere was already in full swing. Stalls had been set up selling foods, grilled meats, pastries dripping with honey, strong coffee. Children ran about with ribbons in their hair, while older villagers formed small gatherings, exchanging stories and gossip. Traditional music filled the air, provided by local musicians who used fiddles and drums to send vibrant rhythms reverberating off the stone walls. Men and women in bright outfits danced in informal circles. It was a swirl of color and life. When it was time, the costumed figures, David among them, emerged from different corners of the village, converging in the square. He noticed how each guardian's attire was unique, with variations in color schemes and mask designs. One man wore a mask shaped into an almost smiling face, while another's bore a serene, neutral expression. Each group of guardians was preceded by dancers and musicians, a kaleidoscope of movement that made the stone plaza seem like a stage from another era. David took his position. Beside him, Darius, who had participated in his youth, was dressed in similarly ornate attire. David felt the first shudder of nerves when the music shifted to a steady drumbeat, the cue for the central procession to begin. They started to move in practiced formations, stepping in sync with the beat. The heavy skirts rustled with each movement. The crowd cheered, clapped, and sometimes called out an encouraging chants that David recognized but didn't fully understand. At first, David was acutely aware of his every misstep. He worried about whether he was in the correct position, or if his arms were raised at the right angle, or if the mask looked straight ahead. But as the procession wound its way through the main lanes of the village, the insistent rhythm of the music and the cheers from onlookers lifted him out of his self-consciousness. He entered a state of focus, and a feeling of heightened awareness took over. Occasionally, children would run up, offering small flowers or bright ribbons. He, like the other guardians, would accept them with a gentle bow. The sensation felt ancient, as if time blurred and the boundary between observer and participant vanished. A particularly moving moment happened when they passed through an archway decorated with vines and blossoms. The music quieted, replaced by the collective humming of the crowd. David and the other guardians performed a slow, deliberate dance, each movement signifying the blessing of the crops and the warding off of hardship. Even beneath the weight of the costume and mask, David felt light, almost floating. His heart pounded, and something in the back of his mind whispered that he was experiencing the festival not merely as an anthropologist, but as a vessel for a tradition far older than himself. Elena, snapping photos from different vantage points, locked eyes with him at one point. He could see her face glowing with pride and amazement. She later told him she nearly forgot to shoot pictures in that moment. overwhelmed by the sight of him moving with such practiced grace. The procession lasted hours, culminating in a final circle back in the main square. There, the guardians gathered in a ring and executed a concluding dance. The crowd joined hands and formed a circle around them, creating a layered pattern of dancing rings. When the last beat of the drum echoed against the stone buildings, applause and cheers burst forth, accompanied by a flurry of confetti made from colorful paper scraps. David could taste salt on his lips, whether from sweat or tears, he couldn't be sure. As the costumed figures were led to a quieter side street to remove their masks, David gently lifted his own. The cool air on his face jolted him back into the present moment. Sophia and Elena rushed to him, praising his performance and offering cups of water. His hair clung to his forehead. Maria arrived shortly after, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did well," she said. "You carried our tradition in your steps." His chest heaved as he tried to steady his breathing. "Thank you," he whispered, feeling an overwhelming mixture of gratitude, relief, and something indefinable. For the rest of the day, the festival continued. Food stalls hummed with activity, music reverberated in every alley, and laughter cascaded from every corner of the village. David shed most of the costume but kept the underlayers, finding a seat next to Elena on a bench by the main square. She handed him a grilled skewer of vegetables and sausage, which he gratefully accepted. They watched dancers swirl around the plaza, the sun dipping low on the horizon. "How was it for you?" Elena asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It felt like stepping into another reality," David replied softly. "For a moment, I didn't feel like an observer. I was part of their myth, their story. And I have to admit, wearing those garments, it stirred up feelings I didn't expect. Something about the softness of the fabric and the mask's mystery. There was a power in that transformation that I'm still trying to process." She nodded. "From where I stood, I saw you become completely absorbed in it. I think everyone saw it too. You were part of their tradition, not just an anthropologist studying it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, letting the evening's festivities play out in front of them. The music grew more raucous, and people began dancing in spontaneous circles. Eventually, Elena stood up, took David's hand, and pulled him into the throng. Even without the costume, David sensed he carried something of that guardian spirit with him. He twirled Elena around, the lines between local custom and their own personal bond seamlessly woven together in that moment. The next morning, the village felt oddly still. Bright decorations still fluttered on fences and rooftops, but the exhaustion from the previous day's festival lay like a soft hush. David and Elena woke early, packing camera lenses and notebooks to do some final documentation. They had a plan to eventually leave the village, continuing their journey further south to see other regions. But with only a week or two left in this place, David felt a renewed urgency to record more. He wanted to capture the stories of older villagers who might recall details of how the festival had changed over time. Over breakfast at the cafe, they encountered Petro again. He approached their table with a nod of approval. "You did a fine job yesterday," he said. "It's not easy for an outsider to grasp the significance of what you wore, but I think you did so with respect." David set down his coffee cup. "I appreciate that. If there's anyone else I should speak with about the festival's history, I'd be grateful for an introduction." Petro thought for a moment. "You might talk to my aunt, Mirella. She's over 90, has seen many festivals in her time. If you're polite, she'll share stories. But she doesn't speak any English, so you'll need a translator." Elena offered a bright smile. "I can help," she said. "I've picked up enough from Maria these past weeks to manage." They agreed to meet Mirella that afternoon. In the meantime, David walked through the now quiet streets, thinking about everything that had happened, the swirl of color, the drumming that had vibrated through his chest, the feeling of the mask against his skin. It wasn't just a spectacle. There was something about adopting a role that transcended the daily boundaries of identity. And though the experience had been, at first, purely part of his research, he recognized that it had awakened a personal curiosity about dressing in ways he hadn't before considered. The garments, the textures, the elegance, they left an impression that lingered. In private moments, he found himself thinking back to how the skirt felt around his legs, how the headpiece enhanced his posture, how the mask gave him permission to move differently. He tried not to overanalyze it, but the feeling remained. Occasionally, he would fold away those thoughts, focusing on the academic side of his project. Yet he knew that once this fieldwork was over, he might seek out ways to explore that side of himself further. That afternoon, Elena and David made their way to Mirella's home, guided by Petro. It was a small cottage near the outskirts of the village, nestled under an old chestnut tree. Mirella was seated by a window, crocheting something in white thread. Lines etched her face with age, but her posture was upright, and her eyes were alert. She greeted David and Elena with a measured warmth. Petro introduced everyone, then pulled up chairs. Elena explained in halting phrases that David wanted to learn about the old days. Mirella's stories were mesmerizing. She spoke of her earliest memories of the festival, men in costumes with simpler masks, dancing by torchlight because electric lights were barely present in the village. She recalled how the entire community contributed. Some families baked bread, others dyed fabrics, and a few elderly women were entrusted with the upkeep of the masks. Over time, outside influences had seeped in, and the costumes became more elaborate, the music more layered, and the festival gained a reputation that occasionally attracted foreigners. Mirella recounted a time decades ago when a journalist came and wrote an article that misrepresented the practice. The villagers felt betrayed, which led them to hide much of their tradition from subsequent outsiders. Throughout the discussion, David asked careful, respectful questions about the significance of specific dances and garments. Mirella answered through Elena's translations, punctuating her tales with gestures. At one point, David asked about how the locals felt seeing men in such ornate female clothing. Mirella's response was emphatic. "The clothes are more than female attire," Elena translated. "They represent a spirit. They are delicate and beautiful, but they're also armor, a way of inviting good fortune. When a man wears them, he's not imitating a woman. He's channeling the essence of a timeless guardian. We do not mock the clothing. We revere it." David nodded solemnly, absorbing her words. He felt an undercurrent of what she meant. The outfits were not a costume worn for fun. They were an embodiment of a storied presence. It clarified his own experience, lending an even deeper richness to the memory of wearing that skirt, sash, and mask. Over the next week, David and Elena quietly wrapped up their research in the village. They spent hours sorting Elena's photographs, identifying which images best captured the living heartbeat of the festival. David meticulously organized his notes, making sure to preserve every quote and observation. Each evening, as they sat on the cottage's veranda, the sunset painting the sky in soft purples and oranges, they reflected on what they had learned. Sometimes neighbors dropped by to chat or to share leftover pastries. Occasionally, children peeked around the door, curious to see if the foreigners were indeed finishing their stay. One late afternoon, David found himself alone in the cottage. Elena had gone into town to pick up some final prints of her photos. The house was silent except for the rustle of the wind through the olive trees outside. He realized that he still had the outfit from the festival in one of the trunks. The other men had returned theirs, but Maria had told him he could keep the set a bit longer if needed for study. On impulse, he opened the trunk and pulled out the garments. He laid them across the bed, running his fingers over the intricate embroidery. A warmth filled his chest as he recalled the sensation of wearing them. A kind of excitement nudged him, and he found himself stepping into the garments piece by piece, carefully securing each layer so as not to damage anything. He didn't put on the full headdress or mask, just the skirt and bodice. Standing in front of the small mirror, he saw a reflection that felt unexpectedly comfortable, if slightly bittersweet. He took a few cautious steps, hearing the same swish of fabric that had accompanied him through the festival's streets. A soft knock on the door startled him. Before he could hide, Elena's voice came from the other side, calling his name. Without thinking, he answered, "Come in." She stepped in and paused when she saw him in the partial outfit. Her eyes flickered with understanding. There was no mockery in her expression, only empathy. "You were revisiting the experience?" she asked gently. He nodded, not entirely sure what words could explain it. "The festival changed how I see these things," he finally said. "There's so much beauty and power in it. I'm still grappling with why it resonates so strongly." Elena took a step closer. "It's all right. I'm not judging," she said. "In fact, I think it's wonderful that you're open to connecting with an aspect of yourself you didn't know before. It's about honoring what you felt during the festival." David gave a small smile, aware of how fortunate he was to have Elena by his side. He knew he would keep these memories and this newfound interest in the garments close to his heart. Carefully, he removed the pieces, folded them, and placed them back into the trunk. "I'll return them to Maria tomorrow," he said quietly, feeling a mixture of reluctance and respect. The final days in the village passed with a sense of gentle closure. David and Elena went from home to home, thanking people who had opened their doors and shared their stories. They brought small gifts, photographs Elena had printed of the festival, small tokens from their travels, or handwritten notes of gratitude. Many villagers expressed hope to see them again someday, should their research or travels bring them back. On their last night, Maria invited them to her house for a farewell meal. The table was filled with baked vegetables, tender meat, bread, and olives marinated in aromatic herbs. Candlelight flickered on the walls. Conversations flowed easily, and even the language barriers seemed to fade amid laughter and the occasional raised glass of homemade wine. Darius was there, along with Sophia and Petro. They reminisced about the festival, teasing David lightly about his uncertain first steps and praising how quickly he learned. Before dessert, Maria brought out the mask David had worn, resting it gently in front of him. Its painted surface glowed in the candlelight. "I want you to have this," she said, voice tinged with emotion. "We keep the outfits here, but the masks we sometimes give as gifts when someone has truly become part of the celebration. Think of it as a remembrance of what you experienced and our gratitude for your genuine interest in our tradition." David's breath caught. He carefully placed both hands around the mask. "Thank you," he managed, his voice hoarse. "I will treasure it always." The next morning, David and Elena set off. A few villagers gathered by the old bus stop to say goodbye. Maria embraced Elena, while Sophia gave David a warm hug and told him to send a postcard once they reached their next destination. The bus rolled up, chugging exhaust into the crisp air. As David climbed the steps, the mask carefully wrapped and stored in his bag, he turned to see the cluster of waving villagers. He raised his hand in farewell, a swirl of wistfulness and gratitude flooding him. Elena settled into a seat beside him, her camera bag at her feet. As the bus rattled away, passing the outskirts where the terraced fields began, David gazed out the window, reflecting on how much had shifted in just over a month. He not only gathered knowledge for his anthropological research, he lived inside an ancient ritual, discovered a bond with people he had once thought of merely as study subjects, and came away with a new awareness about the power of traditions, garments, and the fluid line between the roles we choose and those we inherit. They rode in silence for a while, the road winding through the hills. Eventually, Elena turned to him. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm good," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I'll carry the festival with me, everything I learned and felt, and maybe one day I'll return." Elena rested her head against his shoulder. "Then we will," she said, a gentle promise in her tone. The landscape rolled by in shades of green and gold, the village slowly vanishing behind them. David pressed a hand to the side of his bag, feeling the outline of the gifted mask. He closed his eyes, recalling the sound of the drums, the swirl of the skirts, the glow of confetti falling from above. For a few heartbeats, it was as though he were back there in the midst of it all, dancing under the weight of a culture far older than himself, embracing that fleeting, exalted role that somehow continued to shine within him long after the festival ended. They continued their journey southward, leaning into the gentle jostle of the bus seats, uncertain of what adventures lay ahead, but fortified by the experiences they had shared in that hidden mountain community. A sense of raw reality accompanied the memory of what had transpired, etched into David's thoughts with a clarity he hadn't known before. Though he would return to the United States soon enough, with research notes and photographs aplenty, the real treasure lay deeper. The lingering imprint of drumming rhythms in his chest, the echo of voices chanting in the dusk, and an outfit that had taught him the potency of crossing a boundary he'd never considered crossing before. In the quiet lull of the bus ride, neither spoke. They simply held each other's hand, guided by a silent understanding that their time in that little village would continue to resonate, no matter where they went next.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.